Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of After Dark Syndicate. But today we have the Syndicate version. It is myself, Jeff Black, my good friend Jason Theobald, aka Scooby. We're missing our friend Jason Roberson. He is not here today. He's off living the high life selling companies, I'm sure. We have our good friend Vince Pitstick joining us for the fourth podcast him and I have done together, the third one with Jay.
That's right.
Yep, this is it. We're going to bring it home. We saved this one for last on this day of recording. We are going to talk about calories in, calories out versus hormones, so specifically research versus in the trenches. You have a big, vast, I think we've been all around a long time to see there's this huge left-right debate always going around. So we figured we break it apart because you're into it a lot on the internet. Let's just be honest. Yes. You're out there, you're defending your position and so forth.
Yeah.
And, I've been around long enough that I can say that I think Jay can. Anything's possible anymore. And to just sit here and go, nope, this is the only way. I tend to be like, well, I don't know, man. Like, they told me with my brittle bone disease, I wouldn't do much of shit. But I mean, I don't know. I kind of did. So I feel like everything's possible to a degree.
Yeah, the debate today, I think, is more on people observe behaviors in the natural world. So if you're like a coach, you're into fitness, or you're into bodybuilding, there are things that you will notice, maybe particular to your body or particular to groups of people, that could have a bias, but also could be a real pattern. And people then go to experts maybe in the medical world or in the fitness world or other influencers that are heavily invested in the science, and they'll get an answer to fill the void of like, what am I seeing, right? And what's happened over time in this industry, in the fitness and in the medical industry, is that we lean so hard on science as Bible. And what I've learned after 18 years of being in the functional space that had way more clinical evidence, meaning that's like large case study sample size from experts in the field, versus having large sample size or randomized controlled trial studies, because there's not the medical industry funding large projects, that you have to look at other variables of measurement and observational information in order to develop your theory, which then you can test later over time through experience or another study comes along. And so I think this is the classic debate that we're talking about when we say CI/CO versus hormones. What you're actually looking at is science versus clinical evidence. And that's the debate I think that we should really have today, and give people a well-balanced approach, because if you listen to the people who are really good at arguments, they'll just go, if you can't see it, it's not real. So what that means is if it's not observed yet, it isn't real. And all of us know that that's not true, because it's not real till it is. And how many things in life have we seen that we knew were true that later on research proves? So we know that all science is based on a theory first. Where do theories come from? Observations. So the fitness industry is a complete reverse engineering of clinical evidence. It's experts who watched fitness for a long time, got real popular, like what would say, starting in like what would you say, the 60s?
60s, 70s,
right at the end, right at the end.
In the 70s. Pumping iron, I think, put it on the map.
Yeah. Now bodybuilding's been around. I mean, the art of fitness had been around much longer than that. Sure. However, if you go back to even like the Greeks and stuff like that.
Romans, all the different things.
Yeah. But there wasn't a strategy as much as there was that we started to put together there in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And that's when you started seeing things like Perillo, I think comes in the 80s, right? Perillo in the 80s.
In the 80s, and then like in the 60s, you probably had like Vince Gironda. Like he was putting heavy cream and like nasty, protein shakes. He was putting cream, so it was heavy, the heavy fats, and it was more keto based.
So, but what you saw was an intentional approach at figuring out how to create hypertrophy and build muscle specifically for the purpose of building muscle. And what you had, though, was a bunch of people trying a bunch of stuff and then reverse engineered it and test the theories. And that's where a lot of early bodybuilding came from. But all of us have watched everything from like mask research, right? Recently, we watch medical research where we thought drugs were good and they're bad. See things in the health world that we thought was one thing and is something else. I mean, how many years does an opinion on something change that we've been observing for quite a long time? So what we do know is that while we can look at science, we certainly know that there's a lot of truth out there that hasn't been observed yet or understood yet. And we have to be able to use our mind and our in-depth perception of observation, or at least trusted advisors that are, meaning people in the field that have a generally unbiased approach to giving you the truth. And we have to marry them together in an uncomfortable sandwich to create what we believe to be the truth, so we can make decisions about our health, maybe our client's health, or maybe our family's health. Because I found if you lean way too heavily into the holistic, unproven, unscientific world, you get yourself off on, if you believe everything, you fall for anything. So it's like anything that's like, this food's bad and this has got full of toxins and this is this, you end up getting off in this subset of way off of mainstream that I don't think is beneficial. I do think there's things we know when you look at things in the spiritual realm, when you look at things in different medicinal herbs and healing. Take marijuana as a perfect example. We knew it had medicinal benefits before, finally proven, right? But everybody resisted that for a long time for political reasons. So we know that a lot of the reasons things are observed or not observed had to do with politics and have to do with money.
100%. Yep.
And so we have to understand that I get very uncomfortable with where we're going as a fitness community when it's like basically somebody says, this is the research, which means it's Bible. We can't argue it. And if you try to argue it, you're blasphemy. Who are you to be able to say anything about it? What are your credentials? Because a normal person can read plenty of research and get educated on a topic, right? And the way that I think groups of people try to suppress other opinions is by making the argument of authority. Like, who are you to say anything, right? Tell me your credentials. Well, half the time, take medical field, for example. The medical field, they spend so many years looking at how to use procedures and pills to solve problems that if you ask them about nutrition or anything outside of there, they have no idea, because it's called the expert's curse. It's like the further you study just one thing, the less reliable you get on anything else. And all you can see is that one thing. And so then all of a sudden you become less relatable. And sometimes you become what I call smart dumb. Yeah. You get so smart at something, you're dumb at everything that revolves around it, which is why you can get really dumb answers from doctors to trying to explain issues that to us is pretty obvious. Like, bro, drink some water or get some sleep and you'll be fine. That doc's going to put them on headache medicine, cholesterol medicine, right? So we have to be careful not to follow the scientific rabbit hole so much that we end up believing things that are actually mistruths or only true for a certain part of the population. Because if we don't, we're going to start changing the way we behave or what we tell others, and that is not necessarily the right answer for them. I think we can all agree with that, right, gentlemen?
I can definitely agree with that. I think, too, in this realm where we're at with Instagram and as much information that is available to us, I think, and at least to me, you have your staunch research only. I don't know that it stops us, though, because a lot of people that are figuring things out, they kind of have a little bit of a renegade piece to them anyways. So like they're not going to stop because a few people are saying, what are your credentials? And it's not in the research. So do we think, right? That's what I was going to say. Like that's what bodybuilders do, right? Or people that are, into fitness or anyone who's a renegade in any way. So like, I guess the whole thing is like, yeah, there's this huge debate, but like, I don't think it's going to stop much. Like, I really don't. Like, I still see like things are advancing, and like you've got like for Seco, for instance, you've got your staunch Seco people. But I still see every day like new things coming to light, like OID, and renegade thinking like that. So I guess it is a problem, but is it going to stop a lot of us? Do you think I guess my question back to you, it's a long-winded way to say, do you think it's a problem, or do you think people are going to keep learning a new way and finding ways?
I think peer pressure is how we control the masses. And when you make people feel like they're stupid, or you make people feel like if you do anything outside the norm of what we already agree on, and that the research is telling us what we should agree on, that we're going to get misled. And I think that there's a lot of coaches, and I know this in the medical field, they're so scared of doing anything outside the standard of care or what their peers think is the right answer, that it keeps people sick, millions of people sick. And I see it happening in the fitness world, that people are afraid. And I know the amount that I've been attacked and other people that have been attacked. And these people are like, well, of course this isn't true. There's no research on it. Really? Because everything that you believe in today at one point had no research, was observed and then reverse engineered. So to suggest that there's not new stuff that we shouldn't be pushing forward on is just irresponsible. But we're not trying to help people in the social media space. We're trying to win arguments and gain followers. Yeah. Right? And that's the problem that I have. Like, let me give you an example. I love, listen, this is not an anti-science conversation. I love Alan Aragon, right? I think some of the work that Lane does, I think some of the work that a lot of these other science-driven people in the fitness field, they are necessary. But what you'll notice is that there's an arrogance and a staunch position that anything that isn't observed yet is wrong. And that means don't look for anything else. If it's not visible, it's not real. And
do you think that's stopping people?
I absolutely do.
Okay.
I absolutely do.
But do you think it's more in the medical field, or you think it's in the coaching industry too?
It's rapidly moving into the coaching field.
Okay.
And I think it's getting worse.
Okay.
Because of the anti-funk. You see the anti-groups coming. You see a lot of the things happening.
I do, but I guess, and then this is another question, or at least an observation for me. I still see hundreds of leads come into my company a month. People needing help. Yeah. So that's where I'm like, maybe at one point they listen to that, but they're like, it's not working for me. Yeah. So I
get it.
That's where I'm trying to tease out.
I think you're in a vacuum though. I think because you broke through.
Yeah.
You broke through. And I think a lot of other people, do you know how many coaches there are out there right now? There are enough coaches right now in the United States that one coach could see 100 people. And yet, look how poor the state of coaching really is, in my opinion. I don't think it's doing a lot of good yet. I think it will do good more. I don't think it's doing what it needs to be. And most of it's personal trainers and people doing things that the research says is the right thing to do sometimes, but then they're overdoing it. Like they're underfeeding them forever. They're overtraining the hell out of them.
So you do think that, maybe I am in a vacuum, and I'll admit it. I see, it's probably how my algorithm is.
Yes.
I see most people talking about these things.
That's your algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I go and it's your algorithm.
Yeah.
I've been there. I thought that too. Early on, like everything's going this direction. And I realized that that's just not the world right now. It's not. And most, by the way, in the United States is that's the only place this is going on. You go to Europe, you go to Australia, you go anywhere else, no one has any idea of any of this stuff. Yeah. And that's why I'm trying to launch coaches in different countries. And they're like, Vince, there's no one. Zero. Wow. And so we're just so ahead. That's why I've told you multiple times, we're so ahead of the curve that most people just aren't even aware. And we're so busy just focusing what the research says right now that it keeps people on a track that I think is more harmful than good because we don't give a real answer. I think that most people that are science-driven think people are stupid. And they think people are stupid, so they're just like, it's pretty much like almost like a pastor that like Catholicism to me was like a simple rule of simple steps, and don't fall off or you're going to get in trouble, right?
Yeah. Science has lost the ability to relate. It's like in business, right? You go to school, you got business guys, take a degree. That guy's driving a Honda Accord. Do you want to listen to him for the business advice? You want to listen to the guy driving the Lamborghini, right? Yeah. What you're getting at is, and I found this out because I did 75 hard. The third phase of it, you got to go every day and talk to strangers in public. So I decided to go to the grocery store every damn day. And I just talk to random people. Nobody has a clue what we do. Nobody. If you ask people what like a fitness trainer is in the general population, they think it's like a It Works trainer, like the Wraps, Advocare. Oh, they have these wild pictures of it. Someone's yelling and screaming at you. Like, I'm like, oh, they have no clue that like any of the stuff that we're even talking about right now. So the scientists are so far out of touch that there's this massive disconnect. The big divide is education.
Yeah, public. The public is really uneducated. That's why I was trying to tell you. We look at it. We think it's only like 10 or 12% of people have even heard of a coach. They don't even understand.
Yeah, understand of what we do.
That's why I'm telling you. That's why I'm telling you the revolution is coming. I keep telling you guys, because as soon as there's an awakening, again, there's going to be a coach for everything in the United States and eventually the world, for everything. Everything will be by a coach, especially as AI starts to dominate the space. And depending on what that coach believes, will change the narrative of what the dominant thoughts are. And we're seeing it in medicine right now. Groupthink stifles the medical field. And it look what it did to dietitians, naturopaths, like DOs. So you think it's going good and it can go bad. And that's what I'm deathly afraid. People leave their license or their title to fall into the space of coaching where they feel more freedom to be able to help people in a process and a format that is more useful and with less like restrictions. So more and more people in different fields, coaching for anything. And I'm very, very nervous for this field because it's the last man standing for truth, in my opinion. It's the last one that's going to give you alternative options and guide you to true wellness. I really do think it's our last stand. Everybody that's ever adopted the standard medical tests converts and becomes almost neutered in really helping people. I mean, I know there's some naturopaths that are probably listen to this and be mad, but 18 years ago, I thought they were the great hope. And then they just started, switching over, becoming more standardized testing and more basically, to get their licensure and all that stuff. And today they're a problem. They just spend a bunch of money and I don't see good results, and they still think of things allopathically. And it's like, it was a big disappointment. And so I can see that happening in the fitness world as it continues to grow. And the other part is they keep people away from us because they tell them it isn't real. So then a lot of people are skeptical to come see us because they're going to run into somebody like that first that says that stuff isn't real. Those people that's not, there's no data that suggests this. And that's not entirely true at all. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today is like how to understand, even though the research may say something, that may not be what the research says. And also you have to understand how research works because it's not what Jesus said. It's not biblical. It has limitations. And if you don't understand it or have context, which is what happens, people says the research says, and then they don't give context. If you give statistics without context, you are a liar. And that's the problem. So someone just says, this is what the research says. And then somebody walks off and lives their life like that. And then more often than not, you're going to run into a problem.
You know what floors me though? Maybe I've read too many books. I don't know. But doing this 19 years, you can feed a person up. You can cardio them, non-cardio them, rest them, starve them, anything. Nothing happens. Why wouldn't you try something else? Like when you've literally, that's where I think when I was receptive to it, because when I first got into coaching in 2005, I think we could all agree it was easier for people to lose weight back then. And they got harder and harder and harder. And then gut health popped off at 15 when you and I were kind of chatting about you were doing some stuff with me and I was learning off you as a client, still am. And it was kind of like, okay. But there was starting to become, so I just kept an open mind to it because I was like, well, fuck, nothing else is working.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I try this over here?
Well, now this is a weird, let's have that conversation real quick. Why does every trainer that I talk to that's had any experience in the field over like 5 years says the same thing Jeff does? That it's getting harder and harder and harder. Well, if it's getting harder and harder and harder everywhere in the country, what is happening to America? Do you see what I'm saying? Because I saw it and I was a dumbass 21-year-old, right? I didn't know shit. And yet I could see it. But that's how most people base their lives on certainty. They want to be significant and they want to be certain that they're going to be okay and they're not going to be judged. So they fall in alignment to whatever the research says. We saw it with COVID. Yeah. People are still wearing masks and the data is very clear, right? I mean, I don't want to spend all day on this and YouTube shut you down. I don't even know where you're posting
I
this.
just tell myself those people have a loved one that is suffering somewhere from an autoimmune disorder and just need to do that. That helps me. That helps me cope, Vince.
Right. And I'm not saying that masks don't work in certain scenarios for certain reasons. They do. So the fact is right there alone is nuance to understand that, like, context, we can't just go, the research says, okay, the research says. Like, we cannot do that as a society. That's how they will control you. And it's the same in fitness. And so my problem is that I love research. We'll get into how I dissect it. But what you're seeing is all the people that are doing research are now, they feel this need to attack functional, all of them. And I haven't said much. I don't want to, I'm not here to create, I'm not controversy. I'm not here. I want hope. I'm not here for negativity, right? I want to bridge gaps, not burn them, right? And so I watch them constantly pick at the functional space when they fully well know that they've been around long enough. But that's the problem. Most researchers aren't working with real people. Yeah. Who's Alan coaching? I'm just going to be honest, right? Who's Lane coaching anymore, right? Because if you keep going long enough, you'll begin to realize that your pattern recognition is there's things that you cannot explain. Now, does that mean it's the masses? No. But there's enough evidence. So all I'm suggesting is I like everyone's work. Jordan Sayat, I had him at the Hybrid Health Summit. Yeah. Great dude. Alan, we spoke with him. Amazing guy. Yeah. I have a lot of respect for Lane.
Alan was bomb, man. I loved Alan.
Yeah, these are great people, but you'll notice that their content is going more and more anti-functional because they feel like they have to defend, and I know why. Because you've got these overly holistic individuals that are just making random claims to scare people and influence their decisions. But then again, research is flawed. You can't go on and influence everybody's decisions and say, this is exactly how it is because this is what this research says. I feel that they're both, I'm sorry, the way I look at it, I see it happening on both sides.
Well, research is all context, right? Like, what's the group that's showing up for the research? You know what I mean?
We
like,
need to get into
who, is it a 50-year-old female or is it a 75-year-old woman that, is being, all these different things bring context. Who's paying to have the research done? All these things need to be, I think, also looked at, before anything is like, that's the way it is.
So let's dive in just a little bit here. You good? Yep. Okay. Let's dive in a little bit on the research side. So first, I think it's important to understand that, like, take something as simple as how fully extended do I need to go and how much load do I need to add? Or is it weight or reps for maximizing hypertrophy and protein and muscle development, right? Think about how many times we've changed our opinion on that. Recently, I don't know if you saw the full extension to half and even maybe possibly like quarter reps post failure, like seems to maybe be the most effective way to build muscle. But you have to remember that the only challenge with all of these fitness studies is the sample sizes are so small. Mm-hmm. We tend to forget that. If you don't have a large sample size, you can't make the claim that this is what you do. Now, granted, I don't hear, to Lane's extent and Alan, I don't want to misrepresent those guys. A lot of times those two do a really good job of being like, this is what it looks like it appears is the best answer right now. Yeah. I'll give you that. But then when they say other things are completely untrue that are just not fully tested yet or only have some in vitro or like in vivo testing, right? So either it's just been done on an animal or it's just had single cell testing. There can be a lot of evidence for it, but then you want to go, well, because there's no randomized controlled trials, it's not real. Though that's not fair because we were talking about training and we were talking about the best opportunities for training. Just because there wasn't science doesn't mean we weren't trying strategies to get the best outcome. So of course people are going to continue to figure out why there's still problems with people where caloric deficits and resistance training seem to be failing people. And what they want to do is go, well, and this is my challenge. If there's something that I don't understand and it hasn't been fully observed, then I'm just going to say it isn't real. That fundamental like paradigm model gets groupthink and it is dangerous to progress. Because if we had said that about fitness a while ago, we wouldn't have the research that we have today. People kept pushing forward. So it's very hypocritical. It's very hypocritical of people in research to go, there's no data that means this is false and don't do this and don't be a part of this or none of that works. Like that's so hypocritical. Like, no offense to Lane's book, but his book came out on all the science on fitness. Well, that was stuff that you guys were guessing on and then figured out later. So you were doing stuff that didn't have research, right, but it was still true just because you hadn't observed it yet.
Right.
And then you reverse engineer it. The challenge is in the functional space is finding the funding, getting the research participants. And there's a lot of things that are the problem with research. Research does not necessarily do a good job of isolating its population. So most of the people where research is done is on overfed, inactive people,
right,
which does represent probably about 50% of America. But the people that are watching research, fitness, health gurus are not those people.
That is 100% true.
So you're not even talking to the people that you're citing the research on.
Most people's content for coaching is way over people's heads.
Yes.
And I know that from owning a gym because people come up to me all the time and they'll have me like explain something that I thought was already low level. And I'll be like, whoa. And yeah, the gym really opened up my eyes. So I get where you're going with this. Like, this is where it's fat.
So the things that people don't want to talk about because they'll go, what the research says, and then they go, it's Bible. Aha, gotcha. Okay. So there's a lot of ways to analyze research, but the easiest one is understanding, and this is coming up more and more prevalent. No one likes to talk about this, the difficulty of finding research participants. Yeah. It's a real problem in research. They even have it in problem in drug trials. And to go ahead and isolate a population of people, particularly if it's women at the same time in their menstrual cycle, at the same age in their life, roughly, with the same symptoms or conditions, right? Because when you talk about something like metabolism, okay, if you randomly take 100 women at different stages of their life, let's say they're still all, menstruating, but in different environments, different stress levels, different dieting behaviors, different lifestyles, and different internal conditions, you're going to get such a random array of data that you really don't get. You've got nothing. You got nothing. So one of the challenges in randomized control trials that everybody says is the gold standard of research is that you're narrowing it down to 2 variables, but you're not taking into account the environment and all the other variables that impact metabolism while you're studying those 2 variables. So you really haven't told me anything.
Vidal Coaching. Are you guys looking for something that's way out there and totally awesome and cutting edge? Then I encourage you to go check out my friend Vince Pitstick's brand. He's also co-formulator, co-owner of New Ethics Formulations. He has Practitioner Depot, so many great things. Vince_Pitstick on Instagram. Give him a follow. He is doing some amazing disrupting things out there in the health and fitness space. Scooby-Doo. What about Scooby-U and Scooby Health? My good friend Jason Theobald, his brand's out there. If you're a coach and you're looking to take your learning to the next level, be sure to check out Scooby-U. I put my coaches through that university at my gym, Iron House, and they are all better for it and impacting lives in my local community here in Nashville. And if you guys are looking for some good coaching out there as well, cutting edge, dynamic, with a little bit of a fun twist with Jason's personality, check out Scooby Health. They've got all your needs. Be sure to tell them I said hi too.
Coming back to the population issue is that a lot of the research that we cite on metabolic health or on diets isn't necessarily on the population of people that are reading the research, or that we're citing it and we're telling our follower base, and our follower base isn't that population. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, let me give you an example. Now, this isn't any of I'm not pointing anybody out, but there's a lot of people looking at research talking about glucose spikes and how dangerous they can be or whatever. A lot of that research on glucose spikes is done on type 2 diabetics. Very few type 2 diabetics are following the fitness science guys. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's not relevant to Cindy Lou Who at home, who's really stressed out and might be under eating. right? So what we have to realize first is that make sure that when somebody says, the research says, make sure that the research that they cite is your demographic, and try to take into account that maybe those people didn't have your lifestyle, because it makes your body is a complex system. And so when you try to reduce it to 2 variables in a randomized control trial on something as complex as the metabolism, you're way likely to miss lots of additional secondary information that actually are involved in creating the outcome. So then you say, okay, well, let's not use randomized control trials. Let's go to epidemiological studies. So epidemiological studies are observations of populations basically over time, fundamentally. The problem with that is I love epidemiological studies, but people who do research don't, because you can't make exact claims because there's too many variables. But that's what gives you behavior over time. So that's why when we look at blue zones, we know that generally, if you do these things, you're generally probably going to be okay. But you can't win an argument off of that. So because randomized control trials are considered the gold standard. But a lot of times you get misled with randomized control trials. And it's really hard to do large sample sizes in the health space with randomized control trials. You can do it with drugs because pharmaceutical and us, the taxpayer, are paying for it. Or maybe the Pepsi organization or something like that. So for example, let me give you a good example where I ended up being wrong, but then also I have concerns. So one area is like aspartame and artificial sweeteners. I used to think that they made people gain weight. I used to think that, yeah. They do. I do believe they do create more hunger in the right scenarios because I've seen it enough times. But there is enough randomized control trials, but a lot of it's also done on obese people. And a lot of it is also funded by big food. Yeah. So if we have to give our biases before we give research. And I don't think that's being done enough either. Like, who made the research before you tell me what the research says? And I'm not going to get all tinfoil hat. That's unnecessary. But it really should be necessary that if someone's going to say what the research says, well, we should probably make sure that we disclose who funded that research. Because we know in medicine, we know confirmation bias and that there is bias in science. We know it, right? So let's not pretend like it's not there. But I did, thank God for science, because I did come to realize that if people wanted to use Diet Coke or aspartame for weight loss, and you are someone who overconsumes food, it does appear that it is a good thing to add in a diet. So I got off my high horse on that. Now, that doesn't mean if you drink gobs of it, it's not going to change your microbiome and cause problems later.
See, that's where, but even that is, there's been research that doesn't affect the microbiome.
Yeah, I know.
And
but
I'm like,
when
man,
you look at
I just think I'm still pulling it. I'm
Right,
like, for
so-
now,
so-
I'm just pulling it for now, and then I'll put it back,
Yeah, right. But I'm saying, I guess I didn't have to be so holistic about it, that it wasn't as crazy as I thought it was. And if you understand how it metabolizes, but what I will say is that science helps you observe something and make sure that you don't have bias at how you're looking at it. So that's why Alan and people like Lane has, like, even though inherently I feel like we're always on the opposite ends, they've really helped me level my game up and make sure that I'm looking at something as unbiased as possible. Sure. So I look to data as a general, or research as a general. I
think that's cool that you could disagree and still look up to them.
Yeah, I do. They make me better.
Yeah,
they make me better.
That's great. No,
I don't agree with Lane's approaches all the time to how he tries to fight misinformation. But at the same time, I think he's done something really important for the fitness industry, and he's helping calm some of the chaos of stuff that's going on out there that is just ridiculous. But then when you're pointing the gun and you're shooting at everybody that isn't been proven in research yet, you're hitting a lot of people that are doing a lot of good work that you don't know is good work. Like, that's the problem. Like, he finds, you know what I mean? I know this for a fact because a lot of these guys are the fitness guys that say, it's all just about calorie restriction. BS, I've worked with all of your clients and I've had to fix all of them. So don't tell me that it doesn't exist. You are sticking your head in the sand. That part bothers me. But
I've worked with their clients.
So the problem is that they can't say that, because if they did, they'd open themselves up to scrutiny. So then they have to sit in their framework and in their box and in their echo chamber and said, this is the only thing that is true, and anything outside of here is false. And we know that that's not true because every year we prove something new that we thought was false. So to not be open to what's possible while discussing what we know now, not doing that's disingenuous, is what I'm getting at. And that's why the functional world runs into a lot of challenges with these hardcore science people. And then you got all these young kids and people getting into fitness and people getting into health. And the predominant conversation they're hearing at first is only what some of the data says up front. And yes, it's true. Like, how much data did it take before we realized, oh yes, high protein's good? It took a lot of data over time. How much data did it finally take to realize that, like, that caloric restriction with fitness, it really is the way to create like health, like long-term. Like, caloric restriction does create reduced inflammation. It does have a lot of benefits, but we weren't sure about that. Like, there's been so much evidence has to come over time. Does that make sense? Like, you can't look at one piece of data. You have to look at multiple pieces of data
of it showing that trend
over time.
Yeah.
Over time. That's where the aspartame, there's so much randomized control trial over time that when me and Lane were going back and forth on that, I was like, damn. I was like, maybe I just did that because I got a little bit too on the holistic train. And maybe I need to review my biases a little bit. And even though something may be synthetic in short-term uses, may not be as bad as I thought it was, that doesn't mean I become Mr. Synthetic. It doesn't mean I support drinking Diet Coke all the time. But it does mean, hell, if they want to have one during their dieting, go right ahead, right? Absolutely. And they've found research that it's more effective than water. Now, I think it's from dehydration. There's some other things. I don't know if you saw that. They compared Diet Coke to water and weight loss. And people on the Diet Coke lost more weight.
Probably because they were more adherent to their diet, don't you think?
There's a
They
couple
were less likely.
there's-
Because when I diet for a bodybuilding show, that's the only time I drink Diet Pop.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's my treat at night. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't fucking drink that shit. Yeah. I really don't. I get tea at a restaurant and I drink water at home.
Yeah, I got you.
But when I'm dieting, I need, but that's because I don't then reach for the sweet. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, I haven't dug hard enough into that data, so I don't want to comment any more than that. But so it's super interesting. So all I'm getting at is that research does give us something to look at and check our biases, right?
Yeah, that research you decided, I was like, well, I don't think it's the water. I think it's because they're being more adherent. Right. So you take your inferences and you.
You got it exactly. And so there's that. But most of the time, people are reading research with a very small sample size that isn't their population, like the life that they live, or it's not the right sex for like women all the time. Most fitness research is based on young men. Okay. So the problem that
8 weeks you were telling me once.
Yeah.
Have we ever had a big name researcher ever come out and say, yes, SECO is still the basis, but has any of them?
So interestingly enough, this, I don't know how
Finally went
far
down
this
the
is going to
butt
get
train and
shared.
said
I
VC.
will say this. So interestingly enough, and Lane does agree with metabolic adaptation, and he just released there was a study that came out on diet breaks that was pro diet breaks that saved you about 50 calories versus the one that didn't do diet breaks. But Lane is in research. He was part of a study. His name's on the research paper where they dieted people really hard and they couldn't account for some of the metabolic loss, net loss of metabolic activity that couldn't be accounted for by tissue loss after the dieting phase.
Got it.
So what it does show is that there is adaptation that occurs that leads to a slowing down after long periods of dieting, right? But I don't even hear him talk about that much. But he's on the research, and so these are the things that I'm talking about. So in the functional space, I feel like right now we were where fitness was, 50 years ago, where we observe all these things, and there are studies. There are if people take a look in vivo studies, right? But that's like so in live, those in mammals, right? So in this case, usually rats or some mammal, and you can take a look and infer from that. Although again, that is not necessarily a human. And then there's also your in vitro. The problem with in vitro studies is that one cell by itself behaves differently than a cell in an organism. Yeah. And what you're doing in vivo studies is you're isolating a cell and you're testing it alone. And so that is also very limiting. Yeah. Right? So when we look at a lot of studies on, supplements or functional health stuff, you're going to see small sample size. You're going to see the research parameters and observations are probably not 100% to the letter of what a randomized control trial would be. And because you don't got the money behind it. And they're doing studies either on rats or they're doing single cell studies. But that's because we're observing things in the natural world, and that we're using smaller funding, easier ways of testing to look at some of these functional issues. Or whether we're looking at herbs or supplements or whatever. And that's some of the challenges that you may not have in the mainstream science community, especially if you're looking at the medical community. And so what happens to me and let me not get ahead of myself. The last one that I want people to realize is study duration. So most studies are 12 weeks. You get a lot of studies that'll go longer, but they can be even less. And particularly in the health space, if you do randomized control trials, remember, the more the sample, like if there's more people, right, it's going to be shorter time. You can't have a lot of people and a lot of time because it gets really expensive, right? And so your parameters kind of get smaller and smaller of what you can infer because you could do less. So I know for like medical research, a first randomized control trial on a drug, they expect at least 60, and then they want you to go to 206 somewhere in there, like a upward scale. But how much can you really infer when you think about the diversity of the bio individuality, right? But the issue that I have is that something in the short term is always, what do we know about the human body that we've talked about in other podcasts? Anything you do for a short period of time can be positive. So 12-week studies, like I know right now, just so you guys know, I could take any new ethics supplement. I could run it in a quick study, 12 weeks apply it, and it's going to have a positive outcome because it's a new stimulus to that human body. That's why everything in the research looks so good in 12-week studies. Right, like glutathione.
I'm not even a big research study kind of guy to read and all that stuff. Like I just present alongside these guys, and I have mass respect for what they do and put out. But I agree with you. Like that time of study, that's always been something like 12 weeks.
Yeah, it's been 12 weeks. And listen, there's some studies that are longer. Don't get me wrong, but just understand that a body exposed to a short-term stressor is nothing like a body exposed to a long-term stressor. And conveniently, most medical research isn't long-term, and you don't know when drugs get stacked on top of each other, the exponential effect of that. You're not taking into account other lifestyle factors. The other problem is that people's behavior change when they're observed. So when you look at, like, if you get into theoretical physics, when you observe an electron, they behave differently. Which is insane. Right. So it's the same thing with human beings. Right. When they know they're being observed, they act different. Right. And so, it's that's another challenge to getting truth when we're talking about lifestyles and things that are really important to our health. And so I always think about population, sample size, the length, right? Who funded it, right? All of those things come into account. And then after that, I will then, if it's close and I think it's useful, if it's to the population that I want to help, I'll take a look at what it's generally saying and then say, how many studies are there like it that generally say the same thing? So that's when you get into what? You get larger, studies of studies.
Trends and data.
Trends, data.
Yes.
A whole bunch of things to be able to go off of and start making ideas and claims.
Yes.